Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe's Classic Video Games, back with another cool pinball, kind of, repair video for you today. This is Bally's Rapid Fire. Now, if you're not familiar with that, it's a pinball kind of game. It basically is a shooter. You've got a little cannon at the front, and you shoot little tiny balls all over the playfield at lights that light up. So it's not really a pinball machine. There's no flippers or anything like that. But it was made by Bally, and it has a pinball type cabinet that was made in, and it uses pinball boards. But it's really more of an arcade game. It was a response to Williams and Steve Ritchie coming up with Hyperball, which was the same type of concept. So Bally just completely ripped them off and made their own version. We got this in the other day, and the thing was filthy. Filthy. So we've been cleaning it and cleaning it and cleaning it and cleaning it, and we finally got it pretty clean, so we figured we could start shooting a video. We don't really like filming them whenever they're just completely disgusting, because people will think, you know, that we sold it like that. So we want to get it cleaned up first. So we've got it pretty clean. We got the playfield cleaned up decent, at least, and we were just about to do some repair stuff on it. So we figured we'd film just a little bit of kind of how these work and what it's all about and all of that as we went through it. So this is the big shooter assembly. We've cleaned it up a little bit. You can see it looks pretty good. I wonder what that hits. Is that supposed to? Oh, it probably doesn't whenever the thing's in it. We've never had one of these working, so we're kind of learning as we go through it. But basically the way the game works is you have big handles on the control panel that goes on the front, and when you squeeze the trigger, bodies get hauled off. Did I mess that up? But it has this big coil here, and these little pinballs drop down here, and then this coil fires. I can't really get it to fire, but there's a pin that shoots the ball out the cannon towards whatever you're aiming at. And there's all these lights that light up on the playfield, and you shoot them. So the things aren't really that valuable because everybody doesn't really like them because they're not a pinball. But, you know, if we get something cool like this in, we're definitely going to save it. So we have been trying to save it. So we're going to work through it a little bit. Let's see here. What do I need to do? I'll pop up the hood. I'll pop up this again and show you like what's down inside of it. Okay, so we've actually got a bunch of parts out of it that we're painting and cleaning and stuff. Some of them are even hanging out the front of it. But basically the way it works is all the balls, after they go in whatever hole they went in, they fall down on this, I think they call this a baffle board. It's kind of like in the old bingo machines. And they fall back down into the thing, go back down into the track. This motor spins them around back up to the top and back into the top of the cannon. So there's some other stuff that goes here that we're still working on. But if you take this, is it a baffle board? If you take that board out, you can get down into the very bottom of the cabinet. But they fortunately left us this little cutout here, right? So this cutout, you can get to the power supply. And it's the same old power supply that they had in all of the Ballys in the early 80s. And it's actually a very reliable power supply. So I pulled that out whenever I was down in there cleaning stuff, and everything on it was just fine. All the fuses were still fine, and there's a bunch of diodes on it. They were still fine. And there's two big bridge rectifiers. They were still fine. And there's two resistors. They were still fine. So actually the thing was in as new condition. And then on the bottom of the playfield, you have this, well, two huge PCBs with wires soldered to them, and then also all of these little light inserts. And I'll show you how they're making all those work here in a minute. But basically all there is on the playfield is lights. That's it. There's well, there's a few switches, but lights. So the board doesn't really need to run very many solenoids, but it has 3 motors that it runs. It has a motor here that turns the wheel to get the balls back up to the top. There's another motor that hangs right here that moves a little gate. I think they call that the agitator. And then there is a fan right there, big old fan, and its purpose is to just blow on the big coil that's the shooter to keep it cool, because you can shoot it non-stop, and if you do that with a coil, it's going to burn it up, but not if there's a fan blowing on it. So anyway, power comes in, goes to that power supply. We check the power supply, everything's cool. So now the power's going back up into the back box, and I'll show you where it goes after that. So once the power gets up into the back box, it goes to the solenoid board that is exactly, as best I can tell, exactly like the, they've got a heat sink added to one of them. I don't know if that's original. Exactly like the ones in a regular pinball machine, a Bally pinball machine. And so what that usually does is it takes the 12 volts from the power supply and it turns it into 5 volts and makes the, runs over here to the Mpu board. So the Mpu board has the software and everything on it and runs everything. As you can see, it still has the battery on it, which has leaked and ate up a bunch of the bottom of the board, but it's not too bad, so I think it's fixable. And then on this particular game, it has actually 2 lamp boards because you saw all those lights. So since it has more lights than a traditional pinball machine, they put 2 lamp boards in it. So lights, 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 and more lights. I'm kind of interested in seeing what they're doing with all these solenoids. So all of these on a pinball machine do the, you know, control all of the solenoids that are in the game. But there's I think there's only 1 in this one, but there's 3 motors. So I'm going to look in the manual and see what all those drive. Down here on the playfield, I'll take one of these off. You've got just a few little plastic covers here, and what they're covering up are 4 switches on each side. And the ball, if I can get my camera down there, the ball can hit this little door. If the ball hits that, it goes through a little it goes through a little optic sensor here, and it knows that the ball must have hit it. And then on the back you've got a whole bunch of them. And so if the ball hits one of those, it knows the same thing. And then the computer can figure out, I guess it's just the logic, but it can figure out where this must have been pointed, right? So if that's pointed like that, if it hits that switch, then it knows that it would have shot anything in that lane, any of the lights that are lit up in that lane. So basically it lights up lights. If you shoot it, it can tell because of what switch you hit in the back, and then it knows if you hit the light or not, or if you missed it. Very simple little setup. It's kind of the same thing over and over again, but the whole thing is you can't think of it as a pinball machine. It's not a pinball machine, it's an arcade game. So what we're going to do next, oh, there's also one other thing. There's a couple displays in here, I think 3, and then behind it there is a soundboard. There's Squawk and Talk soundboard. Bally always had the coolest names for all of their boards, so this one is the Squawk and Talk, I believe, which means it may have speech. I'm not sure about that. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull out this solenoid board, work through it a little bit, see what's going on with it, and see if we can get this sucker, get the power right. Okay, so we pulled out the solenoid board, and I'm looking in the manual just because I wanted to see how the thing works different than a pinball. And I found this, which is really neat. Check it out. This was the one in the local mall. Old Aladdin's Castle game. So that's pretty cool. It has some provenance. Is that what they call it? So here's the solenoid board, which is this board. So I wanted to see how it's different than a pinball. So in a pinball, all of these little transistors on the bottom run different things. So this one might run the left pop bumper, and this one might run the right pop bumper, and this one might run the eject hole, and this one runs the out hole, and this one runs the whatever, right? But this thing just has a whole bunch of switches and a whole bunch of lights. So it's got 3 motors, and it's got that big cannon, and not much else, right? So I figured, man, I'll look and see how they did it different. So these are all numbered Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, Q6, Q7, right? So if you look on here, here's Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, Q6, Q7, Q8, Q9, Q10, Q11, Q12, Q13, Q14, Q16, so I don't see Q15, but 1 through 14 and 16 I'll go over to here and are not used, so none of them do anything. Isn't that crazy? So these don't actually say not used, but you saw in the cabinet there was nothing plugged into them. So don't need any of that. So all of this stuff is just populated because they were using a standard board that already had all this stuff on there. So they wasted a little bit of money with that. Okay, so this is like the part that makes the 5 volts for the MPU board, which is all this part. So of course it's the same. And this part down here is the part that makes the displays, this display voltage, which is this part. So it's all the same. So a couple interesting things that they did. If you look up here, they run the what they call the ball filler motor, which is the one up on the top, and the agitator motor. I mean, the ball filter motor is the one on the bottom, and the agitator motor. They run it through this board so that they can turn it on and off with the relay using Q15, the one we were just talking about. So this one right here, whenever the computer, the MPU board tells it, it turns this relay on, and the wires are running from here to here and through this relay to turn the motors on and off. So basically, if it senses that it needs more balls up the top, the MPU tells this board to use this relay to connect the power and turn the motors on. They usually use that for the flippers. So in a pinball machine, it does the exact same thing, but with the flippers, that relay turns the flippers on so that the flippers don't work whenever the game's over. So you got that. So that's one thing that it controls. And then the gun, of course, which is what they're calling the big solenoid. And so Q18 runs the gun. So that's this one here that has a heat sink on it. And interestingly enough, that might have came from the factory like that, because it doesn't look like it's ever been replaced. This fourth one does, though. Looks like they've replaced it, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, Q16, which doesn't do anything, so maybe not. Maybe the solder just looks weird. And then you've got what they call the frenzy flashlights. So flashlights, to make them really bright, they use a little bit more voltage. So they've got right above the play field, there's 3 lights underneath the displays that I guess can shine really bright. So they're using one to run flash lamps, and then they're using one transistor to run the coin lockout. So that's Q19. So they're using all these ones at the end here, and all of those they don't use. And the coin lockout is if the game's off, there's a little coil that loses power, and it pushes a little rod through the coin mechs so that when you put a quarter in, it won't take it. It comes back out the coin mech in the front. When you turn the game on, that coin lockout pulls in, and it makes it where it's possible to put a quarter in. They just did that so that people wouldn't lose their money. So it's a lot like a pinball board, but the only difference I can tell is that there's a heat sink on it, which somebody could have added later, because that coil, that gun coil, is going to be shooting over and over and over again, so it's going to get hot. That's why they also have a fan in there. Oh, and the fan is just straight wired, so it looks like the fan is on the entire time that the game's on. So it's probably going to be noisy. But I just got to do the same things that I normally do on a pinball machine. I got to clean up all of the pins, because a couple of them are used. The flash lamps come out one wire. So I got to clean up all the pins. I'm going to check to see if this voltage regulator is still good. I'm going to replace this big 5-volt capacitor. This capacitor regulates the smooths out the 5 volts for the MPU. So I'm going to replace this, and then I'm going to check these, check this fuse, and check this pot to see if it's still working good, and check these 2 transistors to make sure they're all right. Check this transistor, make sure it's all right, and just minor stuff, you know. So once we do that, we will pop it back in, and then we'll pull out the MPU board and see how bad it's been puked on. So this is what's left of the MPU board. This is the brains of the whole thing. And back in the day, they put this little battery on there so that it would save the settings. And keep basically on most of the Bally's, all this did was keep track of how many quarters went in it and stuff like that, how many times people have played it. But if the operator never changed the battery, it would just eat up the board. So that's alkaline leaked out of the battery. It ate up the board, people. Now, it looks a lot worse than it is. I can probably save this one. I'm going to try to, I think. So, like, a lot of the damage is on this big ground trace, which you just have to clean up. There are a bunch of components here messed up, obviously. But you can actually replace all of those really pretty inexpensively. And then you got damage on this socket. It needs to be replaced. This socket probably needs to be replaced. And this socket may need to be replaced. I'm gonna try to save it. Might not be able to. I've got other boards if I need to work on a better one. And on the back again, that's just the ground trace. That's pretty easy to take care of. But and down here is the same places that we were just talking about. So the way you fix it is, the best way to do it is you grind down all of this corrosion. If you can, you just cut it off, sand it off, get it off, right? Down to shiny metal again. And you can take all the components off, get rid of all of them, throw them in the trash. And then once you get it nice and shiny, you can sand all of the traces and everything. Once you get it nice and shiny, you put vinegar on it. And so vinegar is an acid, and so it you're putting it on an alkaline as a base. So you put vinegar on it, it neutralizes it. After you put the vinegar on it, you rinse the vinegar off, and then you can use like rubbing alcohol or something like that on it, or to make the water evaporate off quicker. And you rinse it off, and then you replace all of the things that were screwed up, which is like the bottom 2 inches of the board, basically. So that's what we're going to try to do. Now, I won't bore you with video of me doing all of that. I'll just go through it as quick as I can. It might take 30 minutes to clean it up. And then after that, it's just putting the stuff back on. So I'll try to get as much of this crap off of here as possible. And then I'll be back in a second. You can tell me if you think it's good enough. So this is about 15 minutes worth. We're getting it a little cleaner. Basically, on the things that you need to replace, you need to get them like shiny again like that before you take them off, because what will happen is if they're still covered in alkaline, whenever you heat them up, they'll just turn black and it won't unsolder and it'll just make a big mess. But if you get them shiny again, you've got enough material there that you can desolder it. So I'm gonna start taking a bunch of the stuff off of that area. Okay, folks, so we got it cleaned up pretty good on the back. Whenever you get a chip off, you can then get to all of the pads, and get them nice and clean. So we took 2 of the chips off. This socket over here seemed to be pretty good. And another thing you need to look for whenever you do these, if you notice, there's a trace that goes all the way around the bottom. And if you see right there, it's been completely ate through. Now that one's not too important because it goes all the way around the other way too, so it's still connected. But the main problem with the batteries right there, you look, it's done the same thing on the front. So there's a trace that goes all the way around the bottom. It would have connected to the battery right there, and then it goes up to that chip and up to this and blah 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 blah. So you need to check to see if it goes up to this transistor we took out. You need to check to make sure all that's still connected. And so we're going to put vinegar on this and see how much of this other stuff we can get off of here, and we're going to brush it with a little toothbrush, and then rinse it off and then start putting the stuff back on it. So we reinstalled the board. You can see we got it pretty clean down there on the bottom. Not perfect, but pretty clean. I got to take it back out anyway to put a battery holder on it. But so basically we need this green LED to flash 7 times if it's working. Each one of those is a test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. And so it is back from the dead. Still needs a ton of work, but so there's a ton of light bulbs burnt out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull off both of these light boards and work through them. Same type of thing. We need to resolder the connectors. We need to check all the transistors to see if any of them are testing bad on the bench and all that. So I'll work through those next, and then we'll see if we can get most of the lights lighting up like they're supposed to.
But that will have to wait till next time. We'll see you soon. Leave your comments below and give us a thumbs up because, damn it, we deserve it.